an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And so to the Sunday newspapers equally. So it's always interesting, I think, how quickly papers can remake their front pages. So a cry out to the Sunday Telegraph, who've gone big on the Tube Ram page overnight in North London. And ditto to the Mail on Sunday. Terror comes to London is their front page. In other news, of course, there have been a lot of weather stories. There's a storm pouring in somewhere in the north of England, I think, and furious aides hit back at Corbyn smears in the Independent on Sunday. The Labour Party's war almost as stormy as the storm. And there's the Observer again. Corbyn critics fear revenge reshuffle after the election boost. A suggestion that Hilary Benn, after that very well-received speech in the House of Commons, might be booted into another role. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, later on. Sunday Times, the RAF launching a round-the-clock blitz on ISIS, and some good news on a front page. Greenhouse gases are falling, it says. And finally, there's Scotland on Sunday. William McIlvanney, a great, great Scottish writer, has died. I would say I remember very well sharing a bottle of whiskey with him, but remembering very well, that is a lie, Andrew, isn't it? Yes. Anyway, welcome to you all. Rohan, you're going to kick us off with the ghastly knife attack in Leytonstone.
Yeah, so I mean, terrible news of a lone knifeman in East London, Leytonstone Station, last night. And I think what's particularly terrifying here are some echoes with the Paris attack. Paris attacks recently. The cry of "This is for Syria" that the knifeman here in East London is said to have yelled is the same cry that the gunman yelled in the Bataclan before opening fire at that concert. And also some echoes too with the Lee Rigby murder, the last terrorist incident.
All we know now, it's an individual with a relatively ordinary knife. Some reports said he had a machete. I don't think he did. An ordinary knife, so a very easy thing to do. Doesn't require a plot. Very hard for the security services to get on top of this kind of attack. Yeah,
very, very scary, this kind of lone wolf attack. We've been warned about this, and indeed in the aftermath last night at Scotland Yard saying more terrorist attacks are likely, which is obviously very frightening.
And this is, of course, all taking place after the vote. Deborah, the RAF are now launching a round-the-clock blitz on ISIS, it says on the front page of the Sunday Times, and that's based on Mr. Fallon, who was here last week, giving a briefing to people out in Cyprus, yes?
Yes, no, he went out to RAF Akrotiri, which is the base from which we're kind of spearheading our air war against Islamic State. And he gave an interview, actually, to the Sunday Times, in which he talks about how we're, the ramping up of our mission against ISIS to sort of five missions a day compared to only one a day previously. And it does concern me that the language that is being used about this is really sort of boys' toys, gung-ho. It doesn't...
It's a bit like a commando comic rather than a newspaper sometimes, with all those pictures of planes and graphs of where the bomb's going to fall, and it's all a bit gung-ho.
It's a shame. Yeah. I guess it's because it's quite a simplistic thing that people can latch onto and understand. But you've had, like Michael Fallon, use language like this is the second Battle of Britain, which is just a bit of a nonsense when, in terms of the number of aircraft that we're using, yes, it's an important part of the overall mission, but it's only a part of the mission.
Remind us how many aircraft we're using at the moment, Deborah?
Well, we did have 8 Tornado jets, and bearing in mind there's 8 out there, not all 8 of them flying, because at least a couple or so will be on sort of maintenance. And then since the vote on Wednesday, we've flown out 6 Typhoon jets, which are a slightly newer version.
Okay, so it's not quite Biggin Hill 1940, is it? No.
It's not. No, it really isn't.
No. Polly, we would normally be talking about this all the way through the paper review, but the Labour Party, true to form, has gathered lots of front-page stories of its own. You've got the Observer there, and that's that reshuffle story I was mentioning.
Well, yes, Corbyn critics fear revenge reshuffle. Plainly, there's a lot of agitation going on of people fearing that there is going to be retaliation against them. A lot of the people who voted for the Syria action are finding themselves abused, attacked, and are blaming the Momentum movement, which plainly is organising quite a lot of it, even if the top people say that. I think there's a danger slightly of them doing sort of wolf-wolf, that real attacks may come. They may really start getting deselected. and they're all being slightly wimpy about somebody being a bit rude to you. I mean, you've only got to look at what people write under our columns. and you feel they're being a little bit wimpish. Oh dear, I'm being abused, I'm being threatened. We are all abused and threatened all the time on social media. And
you were in the eye of the storm during the rise of the SDP and the original Benite movement. Is this slightly familiar? Do you look at this as we've been here before?
It's amazingly familiar. When you see the Momentum people, suddenly people I thought were dead had come out of their graves, actual people from the old militant days. You see those faces again. You think, God, I don't know where they've been all these years.
Yeah, but not in the Labour Party until
But
recently.
not in the Labour Party. And what's more, the Momentum movement really is a party within a party. They're organising events inside Labour-held constituencies without telling the MP, even when the MP didn't vote for action in Syria. They are very well organised.
This is all about MPs who don't have a likelihood of forming the next government very soon. On the other hand, there's a real fight inside the Tory party too, Rohan.
Yeah, on the other hand, so there's an interview with Justine Greening, who's a senior cabinet minister, also a London MP, who's very strongly opposed to Heathrow, as is Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London. But at the same time, 30 MPs, Tory MPs, have signed a letter calling for Heathrow. So there's real tension, I think, in the party. Something that's not given too much precedence here is Zac Goldsmith, who's the Tory candidate for mayor. The government's obviously very keen that Zac wins the mayoral election. So quite what that's going to mean for the Heathrow decision, potentially delaying that decision.
Give us your instinct on that, Rohan.
I think that if you were watching closely, last week Parliamentary Committee published a report on the environmental impact of a new runway at Heathrow. I think that actually gives the government permission, potentially, to delay this decision for until after May 2016, when the London mayoral election has taken place. So I think there's a decent chance there's going to be a further delay.
Pushed off again. Now, I can think of lots and lots of people watching in Scotland saying, you're talking about Heathrow, you're not talking about the Forth Road Bridge, but we're not. We're keeping moving. Back to Deborah again, and there's lots and lots of interesting interviews in today's paper, Deborah, not least with Mr. Assad of Libya. Of Syria, sorry.
Yeah, so Hala Jabber for the Sunday Times has done a number of interviews with Bashar al-Assad during the course of the near 5-year civil war. And it's really interesting. It gives the other face to this and underlines the complications and the fact that it's so much more than a bombing campaign. And Mr. Assad, he sort of says that he calls Britain's bombing actions illegal. I mean, the interview did happen on the Wednesday before the vote, but assuming that the vote would go in the way that it did.
Just talk us through the highlights, Deborah, of this interview, because it is interesting.
Yeah, well, he claims that Europe, rather than Syria, has become the incubator for the terrorism that's threatening the West. He also is
so
very...
from his point of view, we are sending him the terrorists, not the other way around.
Well, no, I think we're creating the problem for ourselves.
Okay.
And then he's very scathing about this 70,000 figure, which was a key part of David Cameron's argument when he put his case to Parliament for extending Britain's airstrikes and operations into Syria. He says, where are they? Where are the 70,000 moderates he's talking about? There is no 70,000. There is no 7,000. So he's very scathing about that. He talks about how, obviously, there's lots of countries involved in the campaign in Syria, and how he says Russia, a key ally, is the only one. And it's interesting, actually, how he talks about how he personally wrote to President Putin to ask him to get involved, and he does not rule out the idea of Russian troops being put on the ground, which
very interesting.
Which would be a very big development.
Just keep it expanding. So we'd have the RAF protecting Russian troops. That'll be a new one. Polly, I said at the beginning of the programme that David Cameron's big new problem was over Europe. We haven't quite justified it in the paper review so far, but it's an interesting piece in the Mail on Sunday, page 2.
Very interesting. It looks as if Cameron is telling people that he might indeed go for Brexit. He might, if he doesn't get what he wants, particularly on this question of benefits for EU.
He could actually lead the campaign to take us out.
He could lead the campaign. And it just shows that the Tory party is as crazy as the Labour Party at the moment, because the people who are running, the Eurosceptics who are running the anti-European campaign, say we don't want Cameron on our side. At which point you think they're absolutely bonkers. We want Boris, they're saying. But if they get Cameron on their side, the danger for those of us who are extremely worried about staying in Europe, the danger is that Cameron could swing it.
Could swing it, absolutely.
And I think it's a really frightening moment.
Rohan, sorry, you were an advisor to Cameron, you know him quite well. What's your instinct about him? Could he actually do this?
Well, it's interesting. He's going to be delivering a big speech tomorrow, the Prime Minister, about delivering on manifesto commitments. And I think the reason they're giving that speech is that their internal polling suggests that the public is concerned that the government doesn't have an effective opposition and therefore aren't being scrutinised enough. Suggests that what the papers clearly show, there is opposition, it's just inside the Tory party.
You know this man quite well. Can you ever see him actually leading a campaign to take us out of Europe?
It's funny, I think that an effective negotiation strategy in business or in government is one in which when you say you're willing to walk away.
So
and
this may be just positioning.
I think we're seeing negotiation happening in real time. No one could really have predicted during the beginning of this call for renegotiation that there'd also be a migrant crisis, a terror crisis, the euro crisis was already in play. But Britain, sadly, to be honest, is at the bottom of that list of crises that the EU is dealing with.
I'm surprised they don't throw us out because we're behaving so badly at a time of real crisis for Europe.
Absolutely. Now, we talked about terror in London, terror in America as well. More and more evidence, Deborah, that this couple involved in the San Bernardino shooting were connected in some way with so-called ISIL, or whatever we call them these days, Daesh. I don't care anymore.
Yes, well, a lot of the papers carry much more about this story with pictures of them appearing throughout the press, and it's interesting to see the reactions now we're getting from the sort of senior political figures in the United States, because obviously this is the first attack since 9/11, sort of terrorist-related attack in the States, and so you've got the various presidential candidates kind of speaking out and sort of giving their using language of how this we are at war, that they've declared war against us. But I thought it was quite interesting in the Observer here. They've picked out a comment piece from a New York Times front page leader comment in which it talks about the moral outrage and national disgrace that civilians can legally purchase weapons.
It is beginning to change the mood, this, isn't it?
It really is.
And there's some suggestion that Obama, once he steps down from the presidency, might campaign on the issue of de-arming America. Or disarming America. It's
interesting. Which way will it go? Will it sort of fuel that? Will it make people really realise how dangerous it is to have these kind of lax rules about arms, or will it make people want to be more armed and be more vigilante?
Okay. Now, given its importance in the world, we don't talk nearly enough about business stories on this paper review. We're now going to rectify that. Rohan's got a story about Tata, but Polly, you've got a very important story there about Cadbury first.
Yes. People were very upset when Cadbury's was taken over by Kraft Foods in 2010. Nothing really the government at the time said they could do about it. It was Labour, actually, at the time, in its last days. Kraft Foods promised they wouldn't fire people. They fired huge numbers of people and closed a lot of facilities. Now it turns out they're not paying tax on £2 billion worth of earnings that they're making here. They've got an elaborate deal with the Channel Islands, another of these tax swizzles, and they're paying virtually no tax. This is a shocker. We could stop it immediately. We could just...
By thinking about which chocolate bars we buy.
Don't buy Cadbury.
All right. Finally, very quickly, the Tata story.
Well, what hopefully is going to be some good news for Christmas. Scunthorpe Steelworks, owned by Tata, been talk of it closing. The Sunday Telegraph today reporting that 3 bidders have emerged for that steelworks. Clearly, a lot will depend on what those bidders decide to do with it, but the hope is that those steelworks will continue to be
crossed
functioning.
Fingers for that, and that they can send the steel up to the Forth Road Bridge, which badly needs it just at the moment. Thanks to all of you.
I've been getting